Hello everybody. In this video, we are going to learn how to prepare an appreciation. As you all know, an appreciation is a very important question. It is asked for all the term examinations, right? So usually it is asked for 6 to 8 marks. Sometimes the poem in your textbook, they ask you to prepare an appreciation of the poem given in your textbook. Other times they ask you to compare the poem with an external poem that is given in your question paper. So usually in this time it is asked for 8 marks essay questions, right? So it is very important to know how to prepare an appreciation. Actually there are 4 steps to follow while you prepare an appreciation. The first step is introduction, right? And actually all the 4 steps, the second one brief summary, third one poetic devices, and fourth one conclusion. All the 4 steps will be learned in detail. Let's go to it. Okay, introduction. So in an appreciation, what do we have to include in an introduction? So we have to talk about the poet. What is the name of the poet? And we will begin by saying the name of the poem, right? The poem, for example, Mending Wool was written by the American poet Robert Frost. And we'll talk a few words about the poet, right? He is a very famous poet, a much celebrated poet of America who received 4 Pulitzer Prizes for his writings. And the speciality of his poems are his poems begin in delight and end in wisdom, like that. Anything that we know about the poet, we'll talk about the poet. Later, we'll talk about the theme of the poem, right? So whichever poem we are discussing, we have to mention what is the main theme of the poem, right? So in the case of Mending Wool, you can say it is universal brotherhood, right? Or a relationship between neighbors, something like that. Okay, so in introduction, we have to talk about the poet and the theme of the poem. Right, so the name of the poem, the poets, and the theme of the poem we have to mention during the introduction. Okay, and the second step is brief summary. Right, so brief summary, what do we have to include in brief summary? It is called paraphrasing too. So meaning, so the whole meaning of the poem we have to write in the appreciation. Right, so you can write it in stanza wise. So there should be a small summary of the whole poem in your appreciation that makes the second part of the appreciation brief summary. So you can write the meaning and implied meaning, if any. So for some poems there will be implied meaning other than the external, the surface meaning. There will be internal meaning, right? So if there is any, you can mention those internal meaning, implied meanings too, and the structure of the poem also can be mentioned. Right, in how many stanzas it has been written, and how many lines are there, and how many lines are there in each stanza, like that. The structure also can be set here in the second part of the appreciation. And let's go to the third part, and the third part is the major part of the poem, poetic devices. So in each poem, the poets employ a lot of poetic devices to add to the beauty of their poems, right? You all know that. So we have to understand what are the poetic devices used by the poet in the poem, and you have to mention, and if needed you can quote the lines too, right? So what are the poetic devices you can use in your appreciation? Sound effects like rhyme, alliteration, assonance, etc. So the poet might use sound effect, right? Rhyming words will be there. So you can mention the rhyming scheme also. The poet employed the rhyming scheme, A B B, A B A B, things like that. You can mention there. Alliteration. Usually poet uses alliterations and assonance to add to the musical quality of their poem, right? Alliteration, you all know that alliteration is the repetition of initial consonant sounds, right? So in a single line we can see 2 or more words begin with same consonant sound. For example, South Sea. South Sea, you can see in the word South Sea. So you can see the letter S is repeated here, right? So expressions like these are called alliteration, and you have learned the alliteration victor, victim in the poem, the leveler, right? Victor, victim, you can see the sound V is repeated. Okay, so these are called alliteration. And assonance. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. The same thing can be seen here too. Yes, E sound, victor, victim. The sound E is a vowel sound and it is repeated here in this expression, so it is called assonance too. Okay, what are the other things? Images. There are a lot of images employed by poets in their poems, right? You know that visual image, auditory images, right, and gustatory, olfactory. So many images are there, and the most important images are visual image and auditory images. So you can mention the poet employs this and this. Auditory images and this, visual images, things like that you can mention, right? Okay, symbolism, symbols. If there is any symbol in the poem, you can mention it. For in the case of the poem Mending Wall, you can say wall symbolizes barrier, mental barrier, things like that. Okay, and the language, what type of language is used by the poet? If it is difficult, if it is a complicated language or simple, things like that can be mentioned. Usually the poets use simple language, and sometimes they try to mystify things using their language. Then the language may be a bit more complicated. So you can mention what type of language has been used by the poet. And mood of the poem, so there are different moods can be used by the poet. Sometimes it may be satirical poem, sometimes happy, right? Sometimes it may be a poem with sad, with a sorrowful atmosphere, right? So what is the mood of the poet? Sometimes it may be a persuasive tone, right? The poem may be in a way that it persuades people to do things like that. So what is the mood of the poem can be mentioned. And figures of speech. Figures of speech, there are a lot of figures of speech employed by the poets, like personification, metaphor, simile, all these things, you know, right? Personification, when inanimated things are given the qualities of animated things, it is called personification. And at the same time, when there is comparison between two things using the words like or as, it is called simile. And if the comparison is without the words like or as, it is called metaphor. So what are the figures of speech found in the poem also can be mentioned in the third part of the appreciation, poetic devices. And the last part of the appreciation, conclusion. So when you conclude, what are the things you have to include in the conclusion? Message or intention of the poet. What message does the poet convey through the poem can be included, right? And what is the message? What is the intention of the poet? What does the poet mean by writing this poem? And personal comments and opinion, right? What do you feel about this poem? What is your personal opinion about this poem? And what relevance is there? How relevant is the poem in present situation? Things like that can be mentioned here in the conclusion. Understood? That's how we prepare an appreciation. Hope you understood. So go through the video once again and get it completely and prepare good appreciations.